dive into authentic conversations about ourselves and our community, exploring topics that uplift and inspire us, from personal growth to social change. So grab your teacup and get ready to join the conversation. I hope everybody is coming in on this Friday afternoon, almost evening, ready to pop some fireworks. Feeling good, feeling great, being safe, and remembering to stay cool and sipping. So as y'all read, the title is Diddy was denied bail. We know that, right? Diddy was denied bail. Those of you that do not know, Diddy was denied bail, okay? And then Trump's big, beautiful bill, it passed the Senate and the House. So we're going to sip tea from all of that today, y'all, on the 4th of July. I'm not going to hold y'all too long. I know everybody's out barbecuing at the lake, at the pool, on the grill, you know, somewhere with family, a beer, some lemonade, some tea. Okay, I got my code Arizona tea, y'all. So we are going to review everything on the Diddy denied bail and the big, beautiful bill. So let's first welcome all of our new sippers over on YouTube. Welcome. Thank you guys for joining the sippers. Okay, over here we sip tea of everything that has to do with our society, right? Our culture, our life. We are live on Facebook. Hey, new Facebook sippers. Thanks for joining. Twitch. Hi, Twitchers. Thanks for becoming sippers. And on Kick. Hey, Kickers. Thank you for also joining Tanisha Talks Teas as a new sipper. We're going to get right into it, y'all. Let me share my screen. How is everybody on this 4th of July? I hope everybody is safe. Please keep you and your loved ones safe, especially if you guys are popping fireworks. We are definitely going to be popping some fireworks. We have our big family pack of fireworks and stuff. And so we're looking forward to getting out after the sun goes down and popping some fireworks. So Diddy was denied bail, y'all. What is that all about? Let's review what that looked like for Diddy. We do know that Diddy was
has been
of the transpo of HO, transpo of a 304. Okay, he was charged and convicted of transpo of a 304. And twice convicted of each charge. He was let free of acquitted of the other three more serious charges, right? So let's get into it.
Bail after the verdict in his sex trafficking case, and here's how he took the news. According to NBC News reporters in the courtroom, Combs appeared, quote, deflated as his hopes of going home were seemingly dashed as his lawyers attempted to convince Judge Aaron Subramanian to release their client ahead of his sentencing. In his ruling, Subramanian cited Combs' years-long pattern of violence as a reason for him to remain behind bars, adding that he continues to be a danger to others and unable to follow the law, arguing that Combs, who pleaded not guilty to sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, as well as transportation to engage in prostitution, was acquitted on the three most serious charges of sex trafficking and racketeering, and only convicted of prostitution-related offenses. Defense attorney Mark Agnifilo insisted he should be released on appropriate conditions. As Agnifilo outlined, Combs would be willing to put up a $1 million cash bond, co-signed by his mom Janice Combs, his sister Keisha Combs, and Sarah Chapman, the mother of Combs' eldest daughter Chance Combs, and have no access to his private plane, which is currently grounded in Maui. He also agreed to surrender his passport, undergo drug testing, and restrict travel to areas of New York, Florida, and California as necessary to attend court and meet with lawyers. According to NBC News, Combs was passing notes to Agnifilo as the attorney spoke to the judge to argue for Combs' release. After Agnifilo finished, Combs raised his hand and started to get up, seemingly to speak. Agnifilo told the judge he would find out what Combs had to say, and Combs' attorneys rushed to speak with him. Ultimately, he did not end up saying anything. Combs will remain in jail until his sentencing, which is scheduled for October 3rd.
Diddy denied bail, y'all. So what that looks like for Diddy is he will sit in the detention center in New York, where he has been since September of 2024, and remain there until October 3rd. That is about 3 months, until his sentencing, right? So
Yeah.
I wonder if Diddy can request other bail, requests for himself to be let out on bail more than just that one time. I wonder if he will. Okay. Will Diddy, ask for bail again in the next 3 months? We're going to have to see, right? So.
Thank you for joining us. So many moving parts here today. We know prosecutors argued that there was no legal basis for Combs to be granted bail, while his defense had argued that Combs had demonstrated model behavior while in detention during the trial. So ultimately, why do you think Combs didn't make bail?
Well, Meg, the judge denied bail or release pending his sentencing because he was found guilty of 2 serious crimes. And so generally speaking, when that happens, the person is remanded to custody and is held pending sentencing. There were some unusual circumstances here because he had already served pretrial detention since September, and he was acquitted of these much more serious crimes.
So as we see here, Diddy was acquitted on count 1, racketeering conspiracy, count 2, ex-trafficking, and count 4, ex-trafficking. He was convicted on count 3 and count 5 of transportation of a 304. Both of those charges stuck on Diddy, whereas Diddy can receive. However, Diddy's not a prior convicted person. Diddy has no prior criminal history, so we don't believe Diddy will receive up to 20 years. However, both of those charges that he was convicted of, transpo of a 304, count 3 and 5, they do carry 10-year mandatory and minimum of like a year to probation.
Was offering a bond and other conditions, so it seemed like he could have the opportunity to walk out that door, but that's not going to happen so quickly.
So, Chris, we know the sentencing was scheduled for October 3rd, and there's a status update on July 9th. He will be in custody until his sentencing. Could Combs' legal team appeal his guilty charges? If so, what would that process look like?
Well, yes, I would anticipate he'll appeal. Usually that's going to happen after his sentence is rendered in October. And he could try to go to the Court of Appeal beforehand and say that he should be released pending that sentencing. But I don't think the Court of Appeal will interfere with the judge's really broad discretion on how to treat a defendant who's been found guilty.
All of the legal experts today have been calling this a big win for the defense. Why do you think the prosecution couldn't convince the jury on those more serious charges?
Well, Meg, the RICO charge was really complicated, and it never really seemed to fit the behavior that we saw here in this case. The RICO charges are usually for the mafia or a cartel, some kind of organized crime ring. And here, this was one guy alleged of doing some really depraved and horrible things for his own gratification. Yes, there were other people that he used to assist him, but those folks worked for him and sometimes were even abused by him. So this was more of an enterprise by one person. It really didn't fit. And it looked like a little bit of an overcharge, actually, on what he was actually doing. And the jury just couldn't come to a consensus on these bigger charges, and really as a compromise, it appears, agreed to the transportation for prostitution charges that they could all find a unanimous verdict on this morning.
And we know that both of those charges carry up to 10 years each in prison. What kind of sentencing do you think Combs will ultimately receive?
Well, there's no minimum sentence for that charge. It's a maximum of 10 years. There's guidelines under federal law. They're arguing over whether that could be 2 years or 5 years in prison. He will have served over a year in detention by the time his sentencing happens, and he'll get credit for that time. He also has no criminal history that we're aware of, so there's no prior convictions. And so this might indicate a lower sentence, and after he gets credit for the time that he served, he maybe could do no time, or maybe 1 or 2 years is potentially in play.
And is it possible during that status update on July 9th that the defense team could argue to move that sentencing up?
Absolutely. They already made that play and saying we want this done earlier. And the judge said, well, this is going to take time. There's reports that need to be done. The court will look at aggravating and mitigating factors on what sentence to issue. They're also going to look at the victim impact statements here. And the court said, we're going to take our time doing that. Of course, Diddy wants to get out of custody earlier, but, yes, I imagine he's going to renew that plea to accelerate this process. Why wait 3 months to develop that information?
I'm curious what your reaction was this morning when the jury came back after only about an hour of deliberating and was able to deliver a verdict. Yesterday, we heard that they could not reach a unanimous verdict. What do you think changed?
Well, Meg, these people invested 7 weeks of their lives into this, and I believe they wanted to reach a verdict. And so they were really opposed, it seemed like yesterday, and couldn't come to a consensus. They slept on it and must have just realized, hey, there's one thing we can agree on, that's the transportation. The other charges we can't agree on. And instead of having that a deadlocked or hung jury on those other charges, they just said, hey, we're going to acquit them on that. And that's the magic or mystery that happens in juries. It's unpredictable. At least they were able to come to an agreement, all 12 of the jurors.
All right, Chris Melcher, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman has been covering the trial. She is outside now. Katrina, thank you for joining us. First of all, just why did the judge deny bail for the music mogul?
The judge says that he agrees with the government that Sean Combs should remain in detention. The thing that he really talked about the most was the issue of violence, that Sean Combs' own defense team multiple times during this trial, including during closing arguments, admitted to domestic violence, that he has this violent temper. And as a result, they do think that he poses a safety risk. And this is one of the requirements. There's also an exception for extraordinary circumstances, but the judge said that the personal circumstances that Sean Combs listed as reasons that he needed to be out just don't rise to that level. But I think the real crux of this is that so many times during this case, his team admitted that the domestic violence existed. They didn't try to refute that. And there is this risk of safety threat.
Katrina, you were in the courtroom today. Paint a picture for us. What was Combs' demeanor like first after the verdict and then hearing his bail was denied?
I mean, there is such a contrast today. Earlier, Combs was absolutely joyous about this verdict. He was acquitted on the most significant charges against him. So in many ways, this is a victory for him, absolutely. But he did seem much more worried after he heard that he wasn't going to be getting bail. He sat there looking very serious, passing notes to his attorney. At one point, he actually raised his hand, and his lawyer for a moment indicated that Combs wanted to say something, so we thought he might speak in court. He ultimately decided not to. But there was a moment after court. He turned to his family. He told them, we'll make it through this. Stay in the light. And he said that he'll see them all when he gets out. He said that twice. And then his attorney, Mark Agnifilo, went over to the family and really gave them a pep talk. There were 2 rows full for a his children, his family, his supporters, even Fahim, his security guard, who was named as a co-conspirator in the racketeering conspiracy. And what Mark Agnifilo told them is that today was a great day, that it is extremely rare. In fact, this is the first time ever that the Southern District of New York has lost a racketeering case, he said, and that Sean Combs really beat this by showing up, facing this like a man, not being afraid, and that he's going to ultimately get his life back. So despite the fact that Sean Combs is not walking free tonight, he still says this is absolutely a victory for him and for his family.
All right, Katrina Kaufman, thank you so much for all your thorough reporting and for all those interesting details inside the courtroom.
All right, y'all. So as we are seeing,
breaking news,
Diddy
did
not get bail. And I, have no sentiments for it. We understood that they had an assignment and they are executing it to the best that they possibly can. Diddy probably falls under the guidelines of being granted bail. Unfortunately, he's not falling under the skin color for it. So we're going to listen in on Nancy Grace now reacting to the Diddy verdict.
Diddy goes to jail after exuberant celebrations outside the courthouse with Diddy fans dousing each other with baby oil, of course. Now a somber tone as Sean Combs heads to jail. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. I want to thank you for being with us. Diddy, loving it.
He's loving all the attention. He's loving that everybody is talking about him.
I can smell it a mile away, and Diddy is loving it.
And did you guys hear Nancy Grace say about people outside throwing baby oil all over themselves? There was a video uploaded to the Neighborhood Talk of Armand Wiggins, right? Armand Wiggins is a pretty popular YouTuber that got onto Fox Soul, the Claudia Jordan and Al Reynolds show that Funky Dineva was on as well. And that was, ended probably prematurely, if not for some antics going on around in the workplace with them. However, Armand Wiggins made his way up onto the Nancy Grace show to talk about the Diddy case trial. And he was outside the courthouse when the Diddy verdict was read, throwing baby oil on himself. So I tagged Nancy Grace in the video of Armand doing that. I am waiting to see if maybe she directly responded to Armand. However, you did hear her, of course, say that, she saw them throwing baby oil on each other. And it was like a mockery to people that, were real victims of Diddy and all of that. So, yeah, that was just a wild moment.
Diddy is loving this. You're absolutely right.
After a split verdict earlier in the day where Sean Combs is acquitted of RICO, 2 other counts come into play. Sean Combs convicted on 2 felony counts. There was a massive argument via paper to keep Sean Combs behind bars. The defense fighting tooth and nail to let him out on appeal bond, which means you get out while your conviction is being appealed. Joining me right now, Tisa Tells. You can find her on YouTube at Tisa Tells. Tisa, start at the beginning. Start with the verdict, the split. What happened?
If you're a man, then you've probably heard multiple versions of the following sayings throughout your entire life. Man up, don't cry, and...
When the jury walked in, everybody was on pins and needles. I'm not gonna lie. Everybody in the courtroom expected him to be guilty on.
And there are so many things going around about Tisa Tells not telling the tales of exactly whatever was actually going on in the courtroom. But people are alleging that Tisa Tells had some type of connection with the prosecution so that she could get into the overflow courtrooms and see first, and firsthand and first before anybody else whatever was going on. So it's been a lot going on, y'all. Happy 4th of July, sippers. We are sipping tea on Diddy denied bail and all of that, y'all. Yeah, drop your teacups in the chat. I hope everybody's being safe and blessed on this 4th of July.
At least the sex trafficking. There was a somber tone. They walked in, and when they said, please read, and they said, what do you find ye? On count 1, not guilty. It was a bomb that went off in the courtroom. The public audibly gasped. Nobody was expecting that. There were cheers of joy from Diddy's side. Count 2, what say ye? Not guilty. Again, another bombshell went off. People were in utter disbelief. Even Diddy's most ardent supporters did not expect him to get off on the count of sex trafficking with Cassie. Count 3, when they said guilty for transportation of a prostitute, when they said guilty for the mayonnaise, that is when Diddy's team actually cheered. Yeah, that's all right. Okay, come on. Almost like we were watching a pro football game. When the other ones came in after that, there were jaws on the ground. It was unbelievable. People were looking at the jury, searching into how they could get a verdict in this day and age. They heard Cassie's mother, the 20,000. They heard Capricorn Clark. They heard about the savage beatings. And it was unbelievable that the only thing they said was prostitution. And that is because Daniel Phillips, in his testimony, actually said, at least I'm guessing that just because, that he got paid to have sex for money. It was a travesty. It was an all-out circus. Everybody, including myself, are running to safety.
I've got a question for you, Tisa Tells, and everyone's going to want to know this. You're in a car right now. You had to leave the courthouse. Why?
I had to leave the courthouse because Diddy's supporters were out of control. The first time I ran and did my live, of course, I had 2 armed security guys. Everyone told me, the people in the courthouse is like, make sure you have security. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. It wasn't just me, but I'll tell you what I experienced. Diddy supporters surrounding me, threatening me, saying that they were going to hurt me. It was a serious situation. It got so bad, and there was so much chaos and violence that they actually had to lock the courtroom down and force the Diddy supporters across the street. It was something myself, the news media, mainstream media, new media have never seen in their lives. The level, and again, the jurors, I hope to God they know how to sleep at night. Because again, I'm sure they did their duty. But when all that chaos was happening, as I was being threatened and ushered out by armed security people, I thought, this is what the jury did. They sent a signal that it is okay to use violence. It's okay to drug people up. It's okay to live a life of debauchery. It's okay to do whatever you want. Because guess what? If you work hard enough and you have enough money and enough delusional fans and you have ingrained yourself in culture enough, that you can do whatever you want. And 12 of your peers will look the other way. Again, this jury was shocking.
Tisa Tells, when you say that Sean Combs supporters threatened you, what were they saying?
They were saying, you effing B, we're going to kill you, you effing B. Apparently I work for the feds. You're a plant. You made this all up because of you. Again, they're not too smart. Because of you, that's how this case got started. We're going to treat you worse than we treated Cassie. Cassie, what we do to you is going to be nothing that they had on Cassie. They were screaming. They were yelling. Some people were saying, apologize to Diddy. Apologize to Diddy. Of course, thank goodness, we had Lenny and we had Jimmy, 2 of the best armed guards out there. So the one thing is they started foaming like wild dogs because they realized that I was not an unprotected woman. And they realized they could not just do what they felt like. And they started foaming like wild dogs, screaming, their voices cracking in anger that they viscerally wanted to rip me apart. This is why their hero had been exonerated. Even in the best of times, these people that support him, there's something wrong with it. And I gotta tell you, Nancy, it wasn't just me. It was not just me. It was anybody that did not have a pro Diddy stance from the beginning, that's who suffered.
Joining me in All-Star panel, but I want to thank Tisa Tells for what she's doing tonight. You know, Rob Shooter is joining me. Rob, I really don't know where to start. This is a blow. This is a huge blow to crime victims all over the country. Huge blow. The big news is right now, Sean Combs is going to jail. Okay?
Yeah.
He's going to jail. I was actually worried that somehow the judge would contravene the law. And the law is, under the Bail Reform Act, that for these two charges on which he was convicted, he has to go to jail. There is no appeal bond, period. But I was so concerned that the judge would somehow find a way to let him walk. And all this time, Shooter, we've been hearing, I've got all these letters here. Here's one from Deontay Nash, in fear, talking about Combs's long, well-documented history of violence.
Okay, so Nancy Grace explains there that there will be no appeal bond for Diddy. So apparently, Diddy cannot appeal his bail denial. So let's keep on sipping this tea.
Violent retaliatory behavior. They're afraid, Rob Shooter. Guys, Shooter knows Combs better than any of us. His longtime publicists know more. But now you can find him at his Substack, robshooter.substack.com, and Naughty But Nice podcast. Shooter, I got to tell you, it was like a kick in the stomach when that split verdict came down.
Yeah, I think everybody was stunned. Before I continue then, Nancy, I just want to send my best to Tisha. What happened to her outside that courthouse is horrific. It's wrong. And I'm afraid these people now have been emboldened because their hero, their idol, Diddy, looks like he is going to walk free. So this morning when we heard the judgment, I think we were all shell-shocked. We were all heartbroken. We all felt like we'd been kicked in the stomach. However, as the day has gone on, we do have to remember, Nancy, that he has been found guilty of two very serious charges. If any other celebrity had been charged with those two charges, those alone, and been found guilty, we would be done with them. So the celebration from Team Diddy, the disappointment from people who've been watching this as closely as we have, I think we can take a step back, both sides, and realize that this is not a good day for Diddy. He is now a federal criminal. He's in jail tonight. He's going to remain there until he is sentenced. And so at least we can take some solace in that.
You know, Rob Shooter, I've been getting flooded by crime victims, rape victims from all walks of life that are upset. They don't really sound mad yet. They're devastated. They're sad. They can't believe this has happened. I've been already subjected to a lot of attacks, verbal attacks. Nothing like what Tisa Tells has been subjected to already. But I give the credit to the prosecutors for going in there, and I truly believe this was a David and Goliath. And they went in against one of the highest profile personalities in our country, Sean Combs, who many people think that they know and they love him. And for some reason, that blinded them, that drowned out everything that 3 sex attack victims said. And one had the video. I don't get it, Rob Shooter. Give me some insight into how Sean Combs got a split verdict. But yes, you're right. He is going to jail on 2 felonies. 2 felonies. That's a victory that Sean Combs is going to jail.
Yeah, that's a victory. We have to hang on to that, Nancy, because in this moment, in this hour, there's not a lot of hope. Everything seems so bad. We have let down not just the people in this case, but victims around the world. Diddy now will be empowered. This is not the end of the story, Nancy. When he gets out of jail, if he gets out of jail, his behavior will not change because he thinks he has gotten away with it. again. If you enable someone, Nancy, they do not change. So mark my words, Nancy, this is not the end of the Diddy story. It's the end of a very, very sad chapter. And I think we've let a lot of people down. And as far as being concerned about safety, I just broke reporting that Cassie has now increased her security. Cassie in New York, her home, now has security increased. And I think a lot of other people, courageous people who came forward, assistants, people that worked with Diddy, came forward and testified. They're very vulnerable and they are very, very scared right now.
When, if ever, was the last time you checked your home's title? Well, if you're like me, the answer is to fix it. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. When I learned about the split verdict, I was speechless. I couldn't believe it, but it's happened. So what do you want the prosecutors to do? Go home and hide under the bed? Should they have just never even brought the case? They did it because they believed it. And I still do believe it, Lynn. I believe Cassie Ventura was coerced and beaten into having sex with male sex workers. That's sex trafficking. I believe her.
I believe Cassie, I believe Jane, I believe sex trafficking. This is a sober reflection today on everything I've been talking about for about 8 weeks now with this trial, that the public, and I'm gonna say the jurors, okay, do not understand predation, power, what sex trafficking is. And a reminder, again, this case was not just about one man. This case was about all of the victims across the country, the world, whose voices have been silenced because they don't come forward, because the justice system usually picks power, wealth, status over believing their truths. But I want to point out, as the day unrolled, there is hope. I've spent all day coaching people, talking people, fielding text messages. And I want to say, you know what? These victims that reach out to me, Nancy, they're not even angry. You know what they keep saying? Please, Lynn, please remind everybody we're victims. Please remind everybody we have a voice. Please remind everybody we are here. And that goes back to we have to do in society a better job of educating about sex trafficking, about trauma bonding, trauma, what predation really looks like. This is the most frightening thing to empower this Sean Combs. And I just want to make the commitment that we will work very hard to continue reforming, raising awareness, and working with the justice system.
Straight back out to Tisa Tells, who has made it to a safe location. Tisa Tells, I want to talk about what happened when the split verdict was announced in the courtroom, and then I want to move to the appeal bond hearing. Let's start with the split verdict. Take it from the very beginning.
The split verdict from the very beginning, when you heard count one, not guilty, a bomb went off in the courtroom, not guilty. No one could believe it. Sean Diddy's Combs side even looked around as if they hadn't heard correctly. No one thought that the jury would actually go this far. Everybody thought that the delay meant that he was actually guilty. When the second count was read, again, jaws dropped open. Diddy leaned back in relief, raised his hands. The defense team was like, yes! I get it. They literally pulled a magic act, okay? They literally pulled a magic act. His team, his side started celebrating, started saying, yeah, when we heard the third count, guilty for the prostitution, okay? Everyone on his side was like, that's okay, that's okay. They were clapping almost like they were watching a football game. When they first came out with the verdict, the prosecution was doing what they were doing. They were looking straight. It is a job, I would assume, to look like they always have it under control. By the time they got to the third count, Maureen Comey looked over at the jury in disbelief. Literally, again, she's always very composed. But even for her to finally look over at the jury on some, are you kidding me? And she just kept looking at the jury as they read the counts. Again, I know the jury did their best, but I cannot feel that justice was served. How can you forget the vicious beatings? How can you forget the $20K the mom had to wire in order for two freak-off tapes not to be released? Okay, that's what she thought when she wired it. How can you forget what happened to Bonna being hung over balcony? She might have got the date wrong by a few days, but the point is it happened. How you can forget Deontay Nash and her best friend Carrie, who got a hanger to the head and saw Cassie getting pile driven into the corner of a bed on purpose. How can you forget all that and come back and say, you know what? We don't see anything criminal here. Again, we can argue about the prosecution. Got Diddy on the head. We can argue about the prosecution, what they could have did better. But the fact that the jury chose to overlook all that, it brought me back to what Rob Shooter said weeks ago when I first started joining you, Nasty, that people get starstruck and they want some of that magic. And it makes me wonder, were they starstruck? Were they feeling sorry and trying to protect a legacy for someone that hid their depravity and their evil ways behind it? It makes you wonder. It makes you wonder.
Please join us on our mission to find missing people, especially children, to solve unsolved. Sean Combs, aka Diddy, goes to jail. That's right. After a last-ditch bid at an appeal bond, he was denied and is going to jail right now as we speak. Joining me an all-star panel, Baptista Tales joining us. She had to be escorted by armed guards out of the courthouse and leave the scene after she was mobbed by Diddy fans. Explain to me what was happening outside the courthouse. I understand that once a split verdict was announced, the Diddy followers, the Diddy worshipers went cray outside the courthouse, actually dousing each other with baby oil and chanting.
They formed a circle. It looked like a mosh pit of depravity. They were spraying baby oil on each other, jumping around, feeling fantastic. One woman in a pair of Calvin Klein briefs and a bra started jumping up and down, wiggling while they sat there spraying baby oil on her, and the crowd was chanting, yay, 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 go and hyping them up. It was a monstrous ball of depravity. When I say I was sickened, when I say I shook my head, and when I said, these are the peers, these are the jury of the peers. And it makes me wonder, as the jury goes home and they look at the television sets and they see what their decision cost and what was on the line. It makes me wonder, how can they sleep at night? It was absolute pandemonium. In between the jumping up and down with the baby oil, women willingly, baby oil being squirted on them, and everybody laughing and having a time like Christmas had just come with Santa and the 12 perverted elves. What happened after that was even more amazing, because while that was going on, there were little fires everywhere of these bands of, I don't know if they're incels, if they're idiots, what was going on, looking for anybody they had ever saw make anti-Diddy content. And by anti-Diddy, according to them, it is pro-justice. They were going out their ways to make sure that everybody paid. And again, I said, this is what the jury cost us. It let us know. It sent a message. It's okay to be depraved. It's okay to beat women. It's okay to do drugs. It's okay to do whatever you want. And that jury, when they gave their verdict, signaled that. Again, I'm still coming to terms with how the jury got to this. Thank God this man was denied bail. Thank God.
Straight out to Sydney, Sunray joining us, Crime Stories investigative reporter on the case from the very beginning. Break down the counts for me, Sid.
Nancy, count one is that racketeering RICO conspiracy. Combs was found not guilty on count one. Count 2, 3, 4, and 5 are those sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution charges. So there was one count each for Cassie and Jane on both of those charges. So the jury found that Combs was liable for both transportation to engage in prostitution charges and not guilty on sex trafficking for either Jane or Cassie.
Straight out to Philip Dubé joining us, veteran trial lawyer joining us out of the LA jurisdiction. So Dubé, this is the breakdown. Count one, racketeering, not guilty. Count two, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion as it relates to Cassie Ventura, You know, the woman that was beaten in that video and dragged back to a freak off her, the one that had to get plastic surgery on her face after Diddy beat her up, that one. That's a not guilty. Count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution as it relates to Cassie, guilty. That carries a maximum of 10 years. And that comes, I believe, from the sex worker who came in, Philip, and described Sean Combs wearing a burqa from the chin up and butt naked from the chin down, and had him have sex with Cassie on video and directed them. That was across state lines. So guilty on that. Count 4, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion as it relates to Jane, victim 2, not guilty. Count 5, transportation to engage in prostitution as it relates to Jane, guilty. So we got 2 guilties, 3 not guilties, split verdict. So there was great jubilation at first when Diddy followers heard split verdict. They heard the words not guilty on count 1 and went crazy. What do you think is going to happen now, Philip?
I think he's going to get 3 to 5 years for the transportation for prostitution. He has no criminal record whatsoever. He was exonerated of the RICO charge. He was exonerated of basically the sex trafficking charges, which really were the top counts. And the jury really cut him a break on those charges. The max for transportation is 10 years, but given the fact that he really has no criminal convictions, I'm telling you, he really could ideally be a candidate for parole. When the court denied his request for bail, he was really telegraphing to John Diddy, defense counsel, and the world that he will be getting prison time. There's no question.
Right. And another thing, debate, let's get real. It's really rare in federal and state court that once you're convicted and a jury convicts you on a violent offense, that you get an appeal bond, which means, okay, judge, I know he just got convicted, but could you please let him walk free now until we take this all the way up to the appellate court and get a decision? That rarely works. Agree, disagree?
Oh, I agree 100%. No higher court is going to find that this judge abused his discretion by not letting him out or by not setting a bond.
You know, Robert Crispin joining me, private investigator at Crispin Special Investigations, former homicide and former vice detective. Crispin, here's the deal. If the judge had granted Sean Combs a bond and appeal bond, now remember, once he was arrested, Crispin, he was kept behind bars. He did not have a bond, right? For a reason. Right. He's got money, and he squats right over by Teterboro, the private airport near New York. You know, if the judge had given Sean Combs an appeal bond, he'd go straight to Teterboro and take off, probably under an assumed name. When you fly a private plane, you can give a fake ID. It's not the same as going through TSA at Hartsfield International or LaGuardia or JFK. No, where they will frisk you and look in all your bags. It's not like that at a private plane. You kind of just walk onto your private plane that he has, have a glass of champagne and go, bye-bye, U.S., hello, Paris. That's what happens, Crispin.
Yeah, actually earlier, just before we came on, Nancy, I was trying to find out where his G550 was because we know that it was out in L.A. A couple days ago. I was trying to see if they had already got those guys up and running and that plane was coming eastbound, thinking he was going to probably get out and dip out back out to LA or back down here to, Miami to where his neighbor.
So we're going to pause it right there, sippers. Do you guys think, considering the charges that Diddy got convicted of, the transport of a 304, he got 2 of them, right, with the potential to do 10 years apiece, considering that he has no criminal record. More than likely, he won't get up to that maximum amount. However, do you guys, I don't follow Diddy. I, of course, know Diddy music, of course, all of that. Damn near everybody that Diddy has brought out, what I'm saying, I've heard of and know of. However, what do you like people that really like follow? Because Diddy does a lot of vlogging. of his personal life and things like that, how he moves and where, what he does. Um, all of that apparently, coming from learning from this trial. Do y'all think that Diddy would absconder? I would like to hope not, because that would be stupid. Even if Diddy got 5 years, he'd serve like 2.5 and be the fuck out of prison and be done with that. You see what I'm saying? He just escaped a life sentence. So it would be dumb for Diddy to absconder and never ever be able to justice, right? On the run from the law. Which would definitely give Diddy like 5 to 10 mandatory if he did some stupid shit like that. You see what I'm saying? Like, he would be doing an Anton Massey type of stupid, escape situation or whatever. To where Anton Massey probably wasn't looking at doing as much prison time as he is now, when he escaped from the New Orleans Parish Jail. So drop it in the chat, sippers. Happy 4th of July, everybody. I'm going to wrap up Diddy and get into Trump's big, beautiful bill stuff, talk about that. And we're going to wrap it up. I may go live later when it gets dark and, let the sipping family, sipping tea family, watch the fireworks with us. We got a lot of fireworks, so I'm looking to do that maybe, or I might only go live on Facebook. I may not go live on YouTube for that, because I don't necessarily know so much the guidelines for YouTube to be popping fireworks. I don't want them to say it was a gunshot or something stupid. So anyway, yeah. However, what do y'all think? Do y'all think that he's dumb enough to absconder if he was to have made bail? I would like to hope not, but you just never know.
Certainly
Drop it down in the chat what you guys think. Also, when you come into the room, like and subscribe. Hold your teacups up to be filled up with this Diddy tea. Diddy going to jail, no bail. He's sentenced October 3rd. So he got like 3 months. Okay. So, yeah, to sit while he waits for sentencing.
Thrilled about him coming back, but doesn't look like anytime soon he's going to be gracing his presence with these guys. So I was trying to find out where that jet was, but I haven't found out yet. But the verdict is it's heartbreaking, and it's a black eye to the victims. It's terrible, horrible for any of these victims that want to come forward, or any witness that wants to put their ass on the line, raise their right hand and testify against somebody when a jury is going to find that guy not guilty. That's really bad for these witnesses and victims. They know what's coming now. Look what just happened to our reporter as she was leaving the courthouse. They were attacking her. This guy was just found guilty of federal crimes. They didn't get the racketeering.
And I'd like to point out, Rob Shooter, what they were saying to Tisa Tells. Rob, they were saying, we're going to do worse to you than we did to Cassie. Shooter, I mean,
it's heartbreaking.
Diddy has to be condoning this. He has been orchestrating the crowd. He's been orchestrating everything.
Yeah, Nancy, I think looking for Diddy to do the right thing at this moment is unrealistic. This is who he is. The whole world has seen who he is. And unfortunately, there's a large amount of people out there who are just perfectly fine with this. Nobody can pretend anymore that we don't know who Diddy is. We know. We've seen him on tape. That tape will exist forever. We've heard the testimonies. We've heard the accounts. We've heard the details. We've seen them. And yet, some people still support him. There's nothing we can do about that, Nancy. And to think that Diddy is going to stop it, that ain't going to happen. He's going to encourage it. He wants people out there. He wants the violence. He wants people screaming. This to him is the party that he always wanted to throw. Shameful.
You know, Rob Shooter, everything you're saying can be transposed to him before he was arrested. In every case, I've told you this before off air, I've seen a million homicide scenes. I've been to the morgue. I've seen it all. But there's always a moment in a trial that just twists the knife. It's very disturbing. And in this trial, there were 2 moments like that for me. And one was in the Hotel Intercontinental video beatdown, where she had already been beaten and she was backing up and she tried to hold up. She's right-handed, was holding her mouth, I think, with one hand, the right hand, and holding up her left hand against Sean Combs, like she could fight him off. Okay, and the other moment was when she was getting beaten and she was down on the floor and Combs had a glass, a liquor glass, held up ready to throw down at her face. And she said, "Can't you see what's happening?" And nobody did anything. And it's just like today in the courtroom. The jury didn't do anything.
They didn't. They didn't, Nancy. It's heartbreaking. People I know who have worked with him, who knew him, many of us are on a text exchange, and they're heartbroken. And a lot of people are really worried too. I don't want to keep harping on about this, Nancy, but this is a very dangerous man. This is a man who allegedly tried to firebomb the car of somebody that was dating his girlfriend, his ex-girlfriend. This is a dangerous, dangerous man. And what that jury has just done has absolutely punched to my gut, to my stomach, to know that Puffy once again rises, maybe not like a phoenix, but
okay, we're gonna wrap up Diddy, y'all. Let's get some, just a few more things to review about the bail denial of Diddy. Okay. And we're going to jump over into the big, beautiful bill.
Let's bring in Lisa Evers here. We're learning right now, Lisa, that apparently bond has been denied.
Okay,
well, I don't know if that's getting it. Let's use this one.
Let's get Jeremy here.
Yeah, Jeremy, can you come back in here when you get a moment? So what we had been positioned for was an argument that because the jury found Sean Diddy Combs guilty only on the lesser of the charges, that there was a presumption that he might be able to go home. The judge even asked him at one point, I imagine you don't want to go back to MDC. He nodded vigorously. Right? Let's use this microphone. I'm not sure if that only works. And Jeremy, if you'll come in here
Jeremy.
too. Should we start with Jeremy's reaction?
Jeremy Sallin is with us. He's a criminal defense attorney and former Manhattan prosecutor. And the bail, the news is that bail has been denied.
Yeah, that the judge.
So there is the law, the statute says in substance that bail would be denied, meaning that he goes in and stays in. There's not an exception. For example, there could be an exception where the prosecution says we consent, and there's other pieces to it as well. There could be a danger to somebody or not, but the bail being kept as it is not necessarily atypical because of the law, though one would believe the fact that he was not convicted of the top charge, and it's been a reduction, and people do walk free and come back and RROR'd.
Well, keeping the bail as it is means there's no bail.
Right. So he's remanded, he's held without bail. So this doesn't change the potential sentence, obviously, because it's still up to 10 years, but for the immediate gratification purposes of getting out, doing what he needs to do and fighting from the outside in terms of preparing for that sentencing, now it's been stripped.
And let me just add, this morning the prosecution was very adamant about wanting to have this extra time to present their argument to the judge, and seemed obviously they were disappointed with the verdict. It was very visible and very obvious, but they wanted to keep him behind bars, and they said, Your Honor, we need several hours to really get this whole argument together for you, and that's pretty stunning.
But again, I think you have to go back to what the law is and what it allows for, and generally speaking, barring some exception, the Bail Reform Act says you're staying, you're not just getting released. He was convicted of a crime. I think people, rightfully so, are disappointed and have questions from the public's perspective when you have such a horrific allegation that is not proven or substantiated beyond a reasonable doubt, and summarily, we're not talking about on the cusp. That's a pretty quick verdict that I think fooled many people, thinking that there might have been a sex trafficking conviction. He's walking scot-free in terms of any allegation of coercion, force, fraud, violence, but he's still in custody.
Okay, so Jeremy, what about? Can we just ask Jeremy, was it a difficult decision for the judge? Legally?
I think the judge is not finding any exception in following the law and that's why he's staying there. The hope from the prosecution, though they didn't, the defense, though they didn't raise it specifically in their letter to the court, was that, yes, there may be the Bail Reform Act, and that was what the prosecution relied on, said statutorily, you can't just let him walk. The prosecution was hoping, the defense was hoping that the judge would look past that and say, he's returned, he just shows that he can follow the court order, he's not going to flee, and he's not a danger to anyone specifically or the community at large.
And then let me ask you this, in terms of the appealing this decision, what's the process now that the defense will have to go through in order to appeal the judge's decision of no bail?
I would expect that he's not going anywhere anytime soon, appeal or not. I think that they're going to follow the judge. I haven't heard what the judge said, so it's hard for me to just speak on an island here. But based on the law as we know it, I think the judge has ample ground to stand on and make this decision.
Let me answer that. Our Sharon Crowley has been watching this and telling us right now the judge says that the government was correct that the detention is mandatory for a Mann Act conviction, what you're indicating, and the judge said that the limited exception to mandatory detention was not met. Sean Combs pointed to his duties as a father and a son, which we talked about, but that does not rise to the level of an appropriate exception, according to the judge.
Right, and so my point moments ago, that's what the law is. But we like to think that from the outside looking in, when someone has been charged with such egregious and horrible acts, and a jury of your peers says no so quickly, there should be a means to say you should be free, but there still is a conviction. The Mann Act qualifies. He's in custody. Whether that's a sign of the judge saying I'm going to harshly sentence him or not, we can't say, but let's not read into it. The judge is simply following the law, and this warrant does not warrant that 10 years that you're hearing about for each of the counts for Jane
and then Jeremy, remind us again about the Mann Act.
So the Mann Act does not involve coercion or force or anything like that. The Mann Act simply says that if you're bringing someone across state lines in substance, engaging in prostitution, that violates the law. I look at this case, not to really go too far off. This really, especially when you hear this verdict, should likely never have been in that courthouse. If anything, it should have been in that courthouse, meaning 100 Center Street or something similar, in a state courthouse for domestic violence, for abuse, for things that physical abuse and assaultive behavior, those types of things. But now we're here. It is what it is. But I think the prosecution really got humbled whether or not the judge is keeping Sean Combs in.
No, 100%. So now tonight he'll be spending the night in MDC.
It's hotter in there than it is out here, certainly for him. But there is now a horizon. That sun is rising for him. There is an out, and I'd like to think, based on the evidence and based on the finding of that jury, that out will be reasonable. And the defense said maybe 20 to 24 months. The prosecution is saying at least 50 to 60 months, even more. Where the judge falls, I don't know. But there's freedom for a guy who's looking at life in prison, which is unbelievable, whether he's in jail tonight or not.
And you told us that there's no minimum with the conviction, the prostitution conviction.
Correct, but there are guidelines, and the judges generally follow those guidelines. There's ability to move along them and go up or down. But I think we have to look at what the evidence is and remember that the prosecution can still bring out in sentencing, though you could not do that in a state court, all of his other allegations and the evidence there that was not supported by the jurors who said not guilty, because it's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's sentencing. It's not the same standard.
Right.
But do I think he's going to get 10 years? We've been wrong before. No, I do not. There is an out for him.
All right. And we'll continue watching this closely. And so that's it.
That's it for now. That's it for today.
Yeah, just to sum up, this has been a day of news on the Sean Diddy Combs case. First, the jury came back and rendered a not guilty verdict on the heavier charges of the indictment. And then there was this talk about whether or not he would be walking out of here. There were a lot of reasons why some people thought that might actually be the case. But at this point, we've just learned that the judge has denied the application for bail, which means instead of walking out a free man today, Sean Combs will have to wait. And the judge noted, we're told right now by Sharon Crowley, that one of the incidents of violence against a former girlfriend was in June of 2024, after Sean Combs knew that he perhaps was illegal. Right. So there are things in the bag, so to speak, that the judge is taking into consideration, that as people out on the street, maybe we were slower to get to, but the judge has made his decision. Sean Combs will not be seen on camera outside the courthouse.
All right, we heard that, didn't we? Diddy was denied bail. I heard that. Remember last live, I was talking about letters to the judge of who would do that and stuff. So I heard Cassie wrote a letter to the judge, y'all. see if we can find an insert or something from that. Oh, I do not like when I do that. Hold on. Okay. Okay, my bad, y'all. Let me bring up this next clip. Y'all remember, like and subscribe when you come into the room to get your teacup filled up. Right after this commercial break, it should be playing.
Violence was starkly depicted in the now infamous 2016 video at the Intercontinental Hotel. The judge cited what he called Combs's.
All right, thanks to ABC News Live. We are going to watch this clip. Burden of proof. The case against Diddy denied bail after split verdict. Y'all hear Cassie wrote a letter about it to, encourage the judge to keep him in jail due to her being afraid for her life. Okay.
Intensity for violence, adding it is impossible for the defendant to demonstrate that he poses no danger to the community. This coming hours after the verdict. The jury finding Combs not guilty on the most serious charges he faced, racketeering, conspiracy, and 2 counts of sex trafficking. But they did find him guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. After the verdict was read, Combs turned to his family and said, "I'm coming home." He then kneeled on the ground, appearing to pray. Combs' son, Christian, celebrating the decision.
Everybody watching, so happy. Pop's coming home.
But that is not what's happening tonight. Combs is still in custody. Let's bring in ABC News legal contributors Brian Buckmeyer and Bernardo Villalona. Brian, let's start with you here. A lot of people thought that Combs might walk out of that courthouse today. What happened?
I thought he would get bail.
So ultimately, as you said in the lead up, the judge said that there's a propensity to violence, that based on the video of the Intercontinental Hotel, as well as the evidence in the case, even though he was not convicted of the violence that was associated with the sex trafficking, the violence that was associated with the racketeering conspiracy, it can still be used.
And see, I figured that the judge was going to be biased on the bail, right? The request for bail. He figured in everything else that he unfortunately was not proven to be, able to get convicted on. But yet the judge more than likely used that as a discretion to not give Diddy bail. So unfortunately, Diddy fell on both ends of the sword.
And for the purposes of bail was denied. We're going to see a sentencing come later. But I suspect, and Bernardo, tell me if I'm wrong, I suspect there's going to be a writ. And I think that the defense, probably next week, will go right to the Second Circuit and try again to try to get him released.
Were you surprised that he didn't walk out today?
I wasn't surprised at all, because you have to think that this judge is in a unique circumstance in the sense that he has heard all the evidence in this case for the last 7 weeks, and he's also heard evidence that wasn't introduced before this jury. So he's in a unique circumstance to know what is his propensity for violence. And also, when you're talking about what happened in this case, remember that a lot of the violence happened behind closed doors. Who's going to police that? Who's going to report that? So there's nothing that he can put in place, a condition to protect the community from Sean Combs.
Okay, Bernard, break down the verdict for us that we found out today.
Yes, so as we all know, racketeering conspiracy, he was found not guilty. But in terms of the racketeering conspiracy, you needed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was an enterprise and there was an agreement within this enterprise to engage in 2 of the predicate acts. You would think, hey, you found Sean Combs guilty of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. And all you needed to prove was 2 predicate acts. But guess what? Despite proving the 2 predicate acts, you didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Combs' enterprise was actually an enterprise that was built with an agreement to engage in these predicate acts. So that arson, that kidnapping, that bribery, no enterprise. The sex trafficking, we knew that was going to be difficult as to Cassie and as to Jane because that forced fraud or coercion. Because there were numerous text messages and messages having to deal with these women wanting to freak off or wanting to engage in these hotel nights. And I think that did leave seeds of doubt for this jury to convict Sean Combs of those counts. So basically, that's what we have. Transportation to engage in prostitution. Very clear that from the 27 escorts that were mentioned during this trial, that they were paid for commercial sex acts and that they were transported across state lines to engage in them.
Right. And I know you said you were surprised. A lot of people were surprised about this verdict. Why?
I was surprised specifically as to the Cassie of it all, right? I thought if there was going to be sex trafficking because of the violence, I thought it might be difficult for a jury to really walk that tightrope of saying, this is a relationship that involved a lot of violence, but the violence wasn't used to traffic her. It was just violent for violence sake. And I could see either side going with either decision in that. But to piggyback on what Bernarda is saying is, I think the difficulty was the criminal conspiracy. I don't think that there was one because, again, as Bernarda said, if you have 2 transportation to engage in prostitution, those are your predicate acts. So the only reason why there is no RICO, it has to be that they did not find there's a criminal enterprise. Now, is that because KK, Christina Coram, didn't testify? Because D-Rock didn't testify? Because the loyal lieutenants, as the government put them as, didn't take a stand? Maybe. And maybe hindsight's 2020, and they would think to themselves, maybe we should have put those people on, and that would have carried the day. But we have at least 2 predicates, so there's only one reason why there's no RICO.
Absolutely. This would have been a different case had the prosecution, the government called KK and flipped her, give her a cooperation agreement to testify against Sean Combs to give us more insight as to what criminal acts that took place and what the agreement was to give us more insight for that jury to know. The jury would have been able to comprehend a cooperation agreement or given her immunity because sometimes you have to make deals with the devil to be able to get the inside information.
Okay, so what happens next? What can we expect at the sentencing hearing for Combs?
Ooh.
So even before you get to the sentencing, between now and then, at some point in time, Sean Combs will sit down with someone from the probation department within the Southern District of New York, and they will create what's called a PSI, or a pre-sentencing investigation. And with that, they'll look at Sean Combs' criminal history, which we know he doesn't have. They'll look at his personal characteristics, mental health, substance abuse, personal characteristics. They'll look at any kind of mitigating or aggravating circumstances. And what they'll do is they'll create a sentencing guideline. They'll give a range of months that they believe the judge should follow in one way, shape, or form as to what Sean Combs should be facing. Now, both sides have already kind of done their calculations. The defense believes that he should get anywhere from 21 to 27 months. The government believes anywhere from 51 to 63 months. And if you're as bad at math as I am, that's basically the government saying 4 to 5 years, and the defense saying just shy of 2 years or so, or just a little higher of 2 years.
So how do they decide what he actually gets?
So probation gives you the guideline, right? And then the government is going to ask, as they said, they're going to ask for a significant amount of jail time for aggravating factors to account. And I think the smartest thing that they will do is they'll say, these aren't just 2 transportation to engage in prostitution. Here are the 27 escorts. Here are the 2 alleged victims. And here are all the flights. There are dozens of them. And they'll try to use that as aggravating, and they also use the violence as aggravation as well. The defense is going to look at all the positive things that you can think about for Sean Combs as mitigation. He donated millions of dollars to HBCUs. He did this for the community. He did that. He was a pillar of society for all of this, and that's why it should be lower. And the judge will take all of those facts and ultimately come up with a decision.
He doesn't have a criminal history. He hasn't been previously.
He doesn't really have a criminal history, but you have to think when it comes to sentencing, especially when it comes to a federal sentence, the judge can take into account bad acts, meaning incidents that you have engaged in that you may have not been arrested for, you may not have been convicted of, but does show your propensity and the type of person you are. This judge is going to try to get the sentence that reflects, one, deterrence, sending a message to the public that this type of behavior will not be stand for. In terms of rehabilitation, what is the best sentence that will rehabilitate Sean Combs so that way when he is ultimately released, he wouldn't be committing these same acts? Punishment, punishment, punishment. How do you punish a person for the acts that they've committed? So wise transportation to engage in prostitution is not just 2 acts, but we're talking about dozens and dozens of you transporting these commercial workers for the purposes of sex.
I would say he doesn't have a criminal record, but he does have a criminal history.
Yes.
And that difference is going to be big for him.
Brian, Bernarda, thank you so much for being here with us. And just a moment ago, I believe the Combs family was walking out of the courtroom. I believe we have some video of that. Joining me now, though, is ABC News investigative producer Tanya Simpson, who has been covering this trial from the very beginning. We're seeing that video there of the family leaving the courtroom just moments ago. Tanya has been in the courtroom with the family and everyone as they've watched this entire trial. You were there today in the room when the verdict was read. Tanya, what was it like in the room?
Hi, Eva. So in the room, there was a moment between when we found out the jury had reached a verdict and when the judge came in and acknowledged there was a verdict, and then they brought the jury into the room to read it. The mood in the courtroom was a little tense, like you could feel it, like there was a lot of anticipation while people were waiting for the jury to come in to hear what the verdict was. When Sean Combs came in, he looked relaxed. He turned around to his mother. He said, "Mom, I love you." His attorneys were standing around the defense table. They weren't really speaking to each other. It was very quiet in the room. Diddy took his seat and he started reading a printout of Psalm number 11. The prosecution attorneys were seated at their table, very quiet. Diddy's family, friends, and supporters were also just kind of seated, waiting to hear what was going to happen when the jury came in to deliver the verdict.
And when the verdict was read, what was the reaction then?
So when the verdict was read, Combs was sitting, he kind of had his head down a little bit. He was kind of shaking or tapping his foot in anticipation of hearing what was going to be said. When he heard not guilty on count 1, he kind of pumped his fist a little bit and shook his head. He heard the second not guilty, he pumped his fist again. When he heard the first guilty charge, he did look a little surprised. There was an audible gasp from a couple of people who were sitting in the gallery, some members of the public and a few family members. And as the jury continued to read their verdict, people were pretty quiet. Once the verdict came in and the judge went juror by juror to confirm with them that that actually was their decision, Diddy looked at them, shook his head and mouthed, "Thank you."
Our reporters caught up with Combs' son after leaving the courthouse today. Here's what he had to say. Take a listen to this, Tanya.
Hey, yo, we love y'all. We love everybody watching. So happy. Pop's coming home. God bless. God bless the whole world.
What was going through your head when the verdict was read? Happy.
And Tanya, you saw Combs' son there. What was the family's immediate reaction when the verdict was read?
So interestingly, there wasn't an immediate reaction when the verdict was read. However, once the jury left the room and the judge was off the bench, the family was very celebratory. They were smiling. They were hugging Diddy's defense attorneys, hugging each other, shaking hands. One member of his family actually called his defense team the Dream Team and thanked them. It was a very, very celebratory mood from the family and friends.
Tanya Simpson, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Still ahead, our Burden of Proof team breaks down this verdict and how the public is reacting to the news. Stay with us.
on GMA. Monday.
As we all know, no cameras were allowed in the courtroom during this 7-week trial. We had an incredible team of correspondents, attorneys, and contributors inside that courtroom, our eyes and ears to what happened. Joining me now to discuss it all, ABC News Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katersky. He's right outside of that courthouse now. Aaron, break down that bail hearing for us first.
Well, it happened about 6 hours after the verdict was read because defense attorneys asked that Sean Combs immediately be released on bail. They offered up $1 million, offered his homes as collateral, and they said the only crime he was convicted of is not a crime of violence. But prosecutors disagreed, saying the violence was evident at trial, pointing directly to the 2016 hotel security camera footage, Eva, that depicted Combs attacking Cassie Ventura. And right away, Combs, who entered the room blowing kisses to his family, ended up hanging his head in disappointment when the judge refused to release him on bail, saying that his propensity for violence is evident in that video, and also citing the defense's own argument admitting that he was a domestic abuser. And so the judge said he posed a danger to the community and the defense could not overcome that.
Aaron, you were outside when this verdict was read. What was the scene like then?
There was a good deal of anticipation, and then I think there was a swell from Combs' supporters, many of whom were holding T-shirts in support. And there was a disappointment by those who were expecting a different result and who thought that perhaps this would have a chilling effect on the ability of prosecutors to convince potential sex crimes victims to come forward in the future.
Aaron, sentencing is for now set for October. What are you watching for there?
He faces up to 20 years in prison, but in all likelihood, he would not serve quite that much time. But prosecutors have already signaled they are prepared to ask for a significant imprisonment, and the defense is prepared to ask for something far less. The judge didn't drop any hints, but he did note in the bail hearing that he was convinced Sean Combs could be violent. The defense admitted as much. That may factor into sentencing. And just because Combs was acquitted of the sex trafficking, prosecutors said that did not negate what the trial laid bare. That he was addicted to drugs, that he was a domestic abuser and a batterer of women.
Aaron Katersky, thank you so much for your conversation today. And let's continue this conversation with ABC News legal contributors Brian Buckmeyer and Bernardo Villalona, senior culture reporter for ESPN's Anscape, Justin Tinsley, and ABC News contributor and senior entertainment reporter for Anscape, Kelly Carter. Bernardo, let's start with you. You have a lot of trial experience. What do you make of the way that this all went down?
I was surprised that Sean Combs wasn't found guilty of the sex trafficking having to deal with Cassie, because I think that was a completely different story. And having been in the courtroom for her testimony, she came off as so compelling. And as a person that was so broken during the time that she was with Sean Combs, I thought that the jury would find him guilty of the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. The racketeering conspiracy was a bit difficult. I think if the prosecution had called a co-conspirator to come in and testify and flip that co-conspirator to testify against Sean Combs, we would have been talking about something different.
Brian, SDNY has like a really good conviction rate, over 90%. Do you think that RICO was a mistake for them on this one?
I definitely know about their conviction rate as the fact that we both practice in that court. So only be gentle because I've got cases coming up there soon. I think this is a case when it comes down to not properly vetting your case, maybe believing your case more than when what other people may perceive. And I understand why the SDNY would look at these alleged victims, why they would look at this fact pattern and say, we have enough to put it all together. But without that critical eye of saying, well, what would another reasonable person in interpret with this? What could another person disagree with in terms of why an individual will partake in this relationship for this purpose other than trafficking? And I think without asking those hard questions, they did not prepare their witnesses nor the arguments that they made to get that RICO conspiracy, to get that sex trafficking. And to Bernardo's point, I think so many people, both in social media, both inside the court, are saying, you can't conspire by yourself. Where are the other people? Where is the agreement? And simply just showing that the end result showed some sort of coordinated effort was not enough clearly for these jurors to say there's an agreement between these people to form a criminal enterprise.
Especially for a defendant of this caliber. When you're talking about a celebrity like Sean Diddy Combs, the jury's not going to look at this like your regular Joe Schmo on the street. Here we're talking about a celebrity, an icon, a man who was given the key to the city. So this jury would have been requesting more than just beyond a reasonable doubt.
Kelly, I want to ask you, because Cassie Ventura's attorney put out a statement today saying that Cassie coming forward has left an indelible mark on both the entertainment industry and the fight for justice. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think effectively what her attorney was saying was that she really gave people the courage to speak out. And we see the immediacy of that, because after her very explosive civil suit filing, a number of other people have filed, similar suits, against Sean Combs. And I think that that's important. She's helped to give voice to people who have been, apparently afraid for a really long time about potentially going up against someone who, again, has been a cultural icon for the better part of 3 decades.
Justin, we have to talk about the cultural icon part of it all. We've talked a lot about the possible impact of this on his legacy. What do you think this means now for his future?
That's such a great question, because when you look at his time in the public eye in totality, right, this trial is right there at the top, because this trial really challenged us to examine his fame and how long he's had this fame, right? But it also really fractured this image of success and power that he built for himself. We look over the course of this trial, so many people testified, namely women who testified about horrific experiences with this guy, some really challenging things to his moral character. And look, I understand the jury came to their decision, but those testimonies just aren't erased from public memory. Nobody has the Men in Black button to basically erase people's memory. So when we look at his career and his time in the public eye and as a full sphere picture, this trial is not a footnote. And I will say this, his sentencing hearing, and this is nothing more than just crazy legal irony, right? His sentencing is October 3rd, 2025. You know what happened on October 3rd, 1995? O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. So when we talk about momentous legal moments on October 3rd, it doesn't really get much bigger than O.J. Simpson and Diddy.
Well, and I just saw Kelly raising her hand over there. You clearly have something to say, Kelly.
No, I was saying I know exactly the significance of that date as well. I think the last time we talked about a trial of this magnitude was the O.J. Simpson trial, which was 30 years ago. When we got that verdict, so that's significant. I will also throw this out there, Justin Sensley, for you. 30 years ago this summer was the 1995 Source Awards, where his presence obviously played a big role, and that's where we first saw the height of the East Coast, West Coast hip hop kind of feud escalate. And we've been spending so much time this summer talking about what happened 30 years ago. And now here we are 30 years later. I could not have imagined we will be talking about not only Sean Combs in the way we've been talking about him, but also Suge Knight in the way we've been talking about him as well.
Kelly, Justin, Brian, Bernardo, thank you all for being here with us and for covering this trial from the very beginning. Coming up, YouTube personality Tisa tells on the moment the verdict was announced and how her hundreds of thousands of followers are reacting.
Sean Diddy Combs, the split decision. Not guilty of sex trafficking and racketeering. Guilty of transportation for prostitution. The verdict sending shockwaves across the country. Now breaking tonight, the new ABC News special. Stunning interviews.
One of the most powerful men in the music industry. And then suddenly, he was over.
New details from inside the courtroom. Diddy, the verdict. The new special breaks tonight at 10/9 Central on ABC.
At any point, you can encounter evil.
Season premiere.
People think the jury dropped the ball. But more importantly, whether or not you agree with the jury's decision, if you look at the chaos outside of the courthouse, it was pandemonium. And when you listen to the threats of violence, the things that are being said, that decision, whether they meant to or not, sent a message of what is okay and what we'll accept.
Your followers, do they have any questions about the verdict?
They have a lot of questions. They want to know, how did you look past Cassie's testimony, the mother's testimony about the $20,000 that he demanded? How did you look past Bonner being hung over a balcony? How did you look past Capricorn Clark? They have questions about how, as we sat through 6 weeks of gut-wrenching testimony, how that is the only thing they found that was illegal.
Did the reaction to this verdict surprise you?
The reaction on Diddy's side surprised me. I thought they would be celebrating, and some people were, but it's like they were holding back on the violence they wanted to incite. They were yelling at new media, old media, we're going to beat you worse than Cassie. You shouldn't have did this. You apologize to Diddy. You're going to pay. It wasn't just me. It was to anyone that wasn't pro-Diddy. It was actually shocking to see.
I remember you said at the very beginning about this, you actually had to hire security.
Yes, I actually today had to be ushered out with 2 armed guards from the melee. And there were other YouTubers and, TikTokers that didn't have security, and they were just running scared. They created a sense of hostility, of violence, threatened violence, so much so that they locked down the whole court and pushed everybody across the street. The guards said that they've never seen anything like it.
For you, now that it's all over, how does this feel?
You know what? I feel like exactly what Cassie's attorney said. I wanted a leap forward for society. Instead, we got a small little emotion forward. But you know what? When you look at victims of abuse, when you look at survivors, when you look at what abuse is, it is going to be a long road to fix what is rotten in society. So you know what? The work continues. I know my followers and people that are advocates, the work continues. And one day we actually will get to a point where the next time a Sean Diddy Combs comes into the court, they are held accountable.
Tisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, too.
And thank you for joining us. For even more on the Diddy trial, make sure you follow our podcast, Bad Rap, the Case Against Diddy, hosted by our very own Brian Buckmeyer, wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Eva Pilgrim in New York. Have a good rest of your day.
Sippers, we are going to go over to TMZ and sip some tea on Diddy. Remember, when you come into the room, to drop some teacups in the chat. Let me know where you stand on the Diddy verdict, him being denial, and whatever side you're on, drop your standing in the chat.
Was a monumental loss for prosecutors in the Diddy case. I wish there were a bigger word than the word losers, because that's what they are. This case would never have been brought if the only issues were whether he transported a sex worker across state lines to have sex. There is no way they would have done it. I mean, you look at this case, and they had 70 Homeland Security agents at Diddy's homes in Miami and LA. And they spent a fortune putting this case together. And what did they get? A not guilty verdict on racketeering, a not guilty verdict on sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie, a not guilty verdict on sex trafficking as it relates to Jane. Those were the reasons why this case was brought. They said he was a racketeer. The jury said no. They said that he was raping Cassie and coercing Cassie and Jane and forcing them into these freak-offs. The jury didn't buy it. Now again, I wasn't in the courtroom, nor were you. I mean, you got to see the witnesses, see the evidence. And the jury not only was not buying it, But now that we look at it, remember, an hour into this case, an hour into deliberations, the jury came back to the judge and said one of the jurors, juror 25, was not following jury instructions. What really stunned me about that is that it's almost like he was the holdout and everybody else felt one way, he felt another way. And they did that within an hour. And he obviously came around, it seems. And this didn't seem a difficult decision for the jury. It seems like they were pretty much in agreement on the first straw vote. So did the prosecution prove its case? No. Yes, he was found guilty on the Mann Act, 2 counts. But again, this is an antiquated law. Let me just explain the Mann Act. That if Diddy had taken somebody from the San Fernando Valley, a sex worker, and then brought them over the hill to a hotel in Beverly Hills and paid them, well, that would be solicitation of prostitution. Guess what? It wouldn't even be a felony case. The DA wouldn't take a case like that. It'd be a misdemeanor case that the city attorney might file. Generally, they don't. But if they do, it's 6 months, maximum a year in county jail, which they never give. And yet, we are now looking at a prosecution that got 2 convictions of putting a sex worker on an airplane and flying him to where Diddy was. That's what this case ended up to be. A huge, a monumental loss for prosecutors. And I got to say that I want to go back to the news conference the U.S. attorney had, where the U.S. attorney spent time talking about baby oil. Heard him talking about baby oil. I'm just thinking, what does this have to do with a federal prosecution? Yes, it's salacious, but what does it have to do?
So the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act became Thanks for watching. Remember to show your support by liking, subscribing, and sharing. It's a blessing. Keep your teacups filled and ready for my next upload. Until then, stay inspired and remember, always stay vigilant.